So I want to do a video today about an issue that has been bothering me for some time. The moment that I heard about it, I knew that this was pretty serious and nobody is talking about it. And I think it's because it's a future problem, and I think that all of the organizations that deal with this kind of thing are just beset upon by legislation right now. There is and litigation, I should say, because there is so much litigation around this right now. But this one really bothered me. I live in California, and we have obviously quite a bit of firearms legislation here. We have a lot of gun control, and California has been throwing a hissy fit for some time. I I know why. I guess the thing is, I do know why and I don't know why they are doing this. Because I think what bothers me, and I think what bothers a lot of people about stuff like this, is that it's so easy to remember a time, if you're even just slightly older, when stuff like this wasn't happening, because there was a sense from government that if you had an unwinnable case or you had an unwinnable bit of legislation, that you wouldn't pass it, or you wouldn't throw it through, and you wouldn't try to get it passed, because you knew it would just be unsettling and destabilizing to the state or the country. And there was a respect for the people's money. There was a respect for the people's time. And if you couldn't keep a law passed, you didn't try to pass it. That kind of seemed like what was going on, where people used to talk about that. They used to actually talk about the fact that we would love to do this, that, and the other thing, but we just don't think that it would stay. And so we're not even going to try it until we feel like we have the will of the people behind us. That is not the case anymore, and this is just a perfect example. So let me just get right to exactly what this is. This is a bill that was put through and passed and signed into law by the governor in 2023, called SB 452. And what it is a reintroduction of a law that went into effect in California, I believe back in 2013, that was recently overturned by the courts. And by that I mean there's a district court that overturned it, and I believe there was an appeals court that then reestablished the fact that this was doomed to failure. And this senator from District 38 just reintroduced the legislation. But what she did was she made it so that this would go into effect at a later time. Right. So I have this little press release here. Let's just read it so that we know exactly what we're talking about. This is from September 26, 2023. Legislation to require handguns to have microstamping technology signed by governor. SB 452 will make it easier to solve gun crimes, as bullet casings will be traced to individual guns. Governor Gavin Newsom on Tuesday signed legislation by Senator Catherine Blakespear, Democrat from Encinitas, to require all semi-automatic pistols sold in California to use microstamping technology. Now, again, I cannot stress this enough. This was found to be unconstitutional and illegal by the court systems. So currently, I should explain that there is a California handgun roster. A lot of states, I only realized recently, don't know about this. In California, we have a roster of handguns from which you can buy. That means that if the handgun is not on the roster, you cannot buy a handgun. In order to get on the handgun roster, originally, the idea was that it had to pass a series of tests. And the testing was pretty expensive. I believe it was like a $10,000 price tag to have your gun sent to a testing facility. And the testing was about what's called drop safety. So what that means is that if I'm a consumer and I buy a handgun and I drop the gun by accident and it's loaded and it goes off by itself, it is not drop safe. California realized that and said, well, you know what we'll do is we'll create this handgun roster. And in order to sell handguns in California, your gun must be deemed by the state to be handgun safe. And they left it at that at first because that's what worked, right? That's what actually kept it okay to have this kind of gray zone constitutionality law in place. You know, what they did was they didn't make it about the Second Amendment. They made it about consumer safety. And so the courts kind of said, well, you know, I think that probably works out. And that is what has been happening for a long time. But what they did was they started to add requirements to the handgun roster. And one of them was this thing called microstamping. It was a concept that in order to sell a new handgun, to add a handgun to the roster in California, what you had to do was make your handgun capable of putting a microstamp sort of QR code onto each bullet that it fires as you fire it. This was technology that did not exist, that the government made up. And the likelihood is, I think that what happened is there was probably somebody who was attempting to make this, who was shopping around their technology. And then the government got a hold of the idea and said, oh my God, that's perfect for what we want. Because one, it's not a real technology yet. It's even if it does kick off, it's going to take years and years and years to perfect. And we could always say it's not good enough. And two, even if it does kick off and it really does work, what we could do is always use the technology to solve gun crimes. They had this idea that they were going to pull bullets or casings out of victims or walls or, you know, brick or whatever, and then check out the QR code, scan it into the system, and then you could know what gun it came from, and then they would come busting down your door. I mean, there's a million problems with the idea of this, by the way. One of the biggest ones is that most of the crime that happens with, you know, where you actually find a body in the alley, and then you have to try to figure out what gun was used in the murder, usually those guns are stolen. Right? So even if you could have a QR code that got you back to the original owner, you'd open the door. They'd open the door and say, "Oh yeah, no, that gun was stolen. I reported it stolen to the ATF a long time ago. Did you guys find it?" At best, that's best case scenario, right? So in a recent Supreme Court case, this whole thing was found to be nonsense. Because this really would be like California saying, we will no longer sell cars in California that cannot fly. Because the technology didn't exist. It never took off. No one could ever make it work. There's no company that does it. This isn't like a scam between a company and the government, where now all I can buy as a California resident is a handgun with the QR codes. No. This is way worse than that. This really would be like saying, if your car can't make it to Mars and back, you can't sell your car in California. You can't drive the car in California. You can't buy one from out of state and bring it in. That's what was going on, and it was crazy. It's been like this since 2013. A lot of people don't know. If you've never been to California, a lot of people don't even know that we have been stuck with old gen guns from 2013 for a long time. The California market is large enough that a lot of companies have just left their old guns on the roster, and they'll still tool up and make them. So, for example, if you want a Glock, let's say you want a Glock 19, like many people buy, what you'll end up getting is a Gen 3 Glock here in California because it's the thing that's actually on the roster and it hasn't changed since 2013. And a lot of people say, well, so what? Who cares? So what? You can't have your Gen 5 gun. Oh, boo-hoo, the tears are running. Here's this world's smallest violin. But it's actually a lot worse than that because what's been happening to the California roster as things have gone on is that we have had less and less and less guns on the roster because you have to re-up. I don't remember if it's once every 1 year or 5 years or whatever, but you have to often re-up and pay to keep your handguns on the roster. And what is also happening, and this was very much on purpose as far as I'm concerned, what has also been happening is that as things go on, as time goes on, gun companies do stop making models of handguns, right? So the only reason that this has worked out and I can still buy a handgun at all is because the California market happens to be large enough that large companies will tool up and make very large batches of California-specific guns. But there are plenty of gun manufacturers out there who just said, well, we're not making that model anymore, sorry. It's not bringing us the money. We don't make enough money on that for that to really make sense. And so what's been happening is by its very existence, the California handgun roster has made it so that it has become harder and harder to get your hands on new guns, period. And there are less and less and less models to buy. And again, for a lot of people, they say, yeah, but you can still buy one, yes? And the answer is for now. For now. There may come a time, it's really up to the producers of the handguns more than anything else. If they feel like it makes enough money, sure, they'll keep making it. But if things had continued the same way, eventually, in theory, we would have been down to something like, let's say 5 to 10 kinds of handguns that you could buy, and we wouldn't have been able to see a new model, a safer model, a better model, an upgraded model for, the foreseeable future. And eventually, in theory, as guns change and change and change and change some more, the idea is, from the government's perspective, as far as I'm concerned, one day there are no guns on the handgun roster. And they go, sorry, they never matched our requirements. They never met them. We want these things to have QR code stamping on all of the guns. And it's a very stupid thing to want. It's a stupid thing to do. It's an impossibility. It's an impossibility, especially because what you would have to do, frankly, is match some kind of it's not just about stamping something onto the bullet itself or the cartridge itself. It would presumably have to be scannable. If it's not some kind of number, it would have to be some kind of QR code because there are so many guns bought in America. People don't realize there are millions of guns bought a month, really, as far as we can tell. It's in the country, not in the state. Millions a month are bought. You have to understand, it's not just a question of having like a simple serial code like 627 stamped on the brass casing. It would literally be some kind of 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 digit number. And it's not happening. There's no way to get a good print every time, to have something that's stamped hard enough, that's stamped clear enough every single time. I think a lot of people just don't understand what goes into a handgun and how complex these handguns are and how crazy they would have to be and how unbelievably revolutionary that technology would have to be. It would become enormous. It would become huge. And that's another thing. They probably heard that and thought, great, good. So that's the end of concealed carry, right? That's the end of that, because how are you going to have this small little handgun on you that isn't going to match the QR code abilities that we want from it. So for all of these reasons and more, the courts recently found this finally to be illegal based on what's known as the Bruin decision from the Supreme Court. This was a decision that came out a couple of years ago and has completely revolutionized gun culture, gun legislation, gun case law. What it said effectively was that if you want to pass or keep a gun law in your state, you have to show the courts how there was a similar law that was in place around the time of the Constitution. I don't remember what year they say, but let's just say like 1792 or so. You have to have some kind of corresponding law that you can show the courts that says, here you are, this is something that even the founding fathers were okay with because, hey, this was a state law back then. And so if there's a correlation, then that law can go through. Everything else gets thrown out. This is revolutionary. This is enormous. It changed gun case law forever because before that, we were using a very different test. And the government could effectively claim that it had some kind of interest, some kind of special interest. And as long as it did that, you had, effectively the court said, okay, well, I think that there is enough of a special interest by the government here that it supersedes the Second Amendment. That's gone. That's out. Now you have to show that there was some kind of historically analogous law, and that's very hard to do. That's very hard to do, especially for something like the California Handgun Roster. Now, even with Bruin, the Handgun Roster's original purpose remains on the book. So we still have a roster, but we're finally starting to see some new models go back on the roster. Because the one thing that the courts did not throw out is that consumer protection aspect, where they said, well, I guess it's okay if you want this to be a consumer protection thing, go ahead and keep the California Handgun Roster, and you can go ahead and have a system where you have them send in their handguns to you. You test them to be drop safe. If they're drop safe, you put them on the roster, and that means that people can buy them. And while that still means that for many gun companies, they are still sort of held at pure blackmail by California to spend the $10,000 per handgun that they want to sell. By the way, color changes whether or not there's a new handgun on the roster. So let's say that you make a gun in 3 different colors. You have to send, even if they are all the same handgun mechanically, you have to send each one of those handguns in as if they are a different model. And that's how California is basically they're putting a gun to the head of producers and saying, if you want to sell here, you'll pay I think it is something like $10,000 or whatever. And it's just a tax. It's just highway robbery at that point. But the court said, look, it is okay to have a consumer protection program for that. But you have to get rid of everything else. And that's what they did. So originally everybody was very happy about this. But this is so now we get now that we've gone over the sort of the history of that in very broad terms. This is the new legislation that passed already from Blakespear. Just puts it back on the books. That's it. They just say, oh, well, we'll just do it again. Now, what's interesting, I don't think it says here in the press release, I don't believe it. Oh, it does. It does. So, SB 452 would prohibit the sale or transfer of a semi-automatic pistol made after January 1st, 2028, unless it has been verified as a microstamping-enabled pistol. So all they did was say, well, what we're hoping is that this is going to be overturned again by 2028. Let's give it about 5 years, and then an automatic law will already be on the books that goes into effect, and we'll just put the microstamping back on it. Screw the courts. I'm sure progressivism is a march that never stops. It never ends, and we are the winners. We are on the right side of history. And in 5 years, we're going to just put this back on the books, and then everyone's going to have to re-legislate it all over again. I think what scares me about this the most is that nobody's talking about it. I think nobody's really discussing this as a real problem, but it is. And there are probably two reasons for that. I think the first one is I think everyone's very exhausted at this point. We are absolutely beleaguered by gun control. If you are a gun guy at all, if you are somebody who follows this stuff and is interested in the Second Amendment as a protector of all the other amendments, we really are tired. We are an exhausted community because this stuff never ends. I mean, it is incredible. There is always somebody new who pops up like just gophers. Just it seems like, and I'm not joking about this. If you want to look into this, start paying attention to this stuff and start writing down the dates that this stuff comes out in. You're gonna realize that new gun control comes out every week. That another thing that we have to fight, on grassroots, in the courts, legal systems, comes out at least once a week. There are many, many, many laws that just keep getting put out there that you have to just keep on crushing and crushing and crushing. It is the one thing that seems like nobody is ever really going to stop caring about. I guess it's just easy. It's just easy meat for the masses, right? Where you just throw it to the base and go, see, look at that. It's a real resume patter for a lot of these losers who don't have anything going on. Like, they don't want to solve real problems. Can you imagine? Like, this is not the only thing that Blakespear has done. I just saw, so when I was trying to look up the SB 452 law, I didn't even realize this, but last month, about a month ago, she passed three more. She SB 1002, SB 1019, SB 1038. I'm not going to talk about those today. I want to keep this kind of short, but this is somebody who is just making stuff up because she needs a resume patter. She's clearly ambitious, and this is somebody who just, they want to be able, really what they're doing, and I think this is probably the strategy for her, is what they really want to be able to say is that they fought the NRA. It's like a weird old boomer thing to want at this point, is that, like, I got a grade F by the NRA. It's a winning strategy. I think it's a winning strategy for whatever reason. It's kind of incredible because we have never seen the amount of gun buying by both sides of the aisle that we have in recent years. This has been, I mean, as a gun guy, I can tell you that it has been very difficult not only to find guns, but parts for guns, upgrades for guns, for the last 3 or 4 years. You have to remember, I mean, not only was there COVID, so everybody was stuck inside and they were working on their homes, they were working on their collections, they were working on their hobbies. But a lot of scary stuff started happening around 2020. You had the riots. The 2020 riots were an incredible sales point for a lot of people. That was when people really were lined up around the block trying to get into a gun store and buy things as fast as possible. So I don't know, in other words, whether or not this is still a winning strategy. But what really makes me mad about this is the fact that this is a strategy that could really take off, where you lose in the courts, and instead of gracefully withdrawing and saying, okay, I hear you. That's enough. The courts have spoken, especially if it's something like the Supreme Court. We're done. Look, until we get Bruin overturned, we're done. Sorry, there's nothing that we can do. We're not going to just keep on putting things on the books in 5 years, just quietly sort of relitigate and relitigate and relitigate. And I think the real problem here for me is that these people really do just have lawyers on the books that can do this kind of thing. It costs them nothing to just constantly assault the Constitution this way now. And I think that what has to happen now is there needs to be some kind of enforcement aspect from the judicial branch, from the courts. Because really all that's happening right now is, at most, the Supreme Court can kind of say, hey, we see that you are not following our directions. You need to do that. And they don't do that until the case gets to them, right? So it has to go through a district court. It has to go through an appeals court. And by the time it gets to the Supreme Court, you're easily talking about over a year's worth of time. That's the point of this. The point of this is that they can just... It's like playing a game of football, but there's a rule in which if somebody takes the ball and just starts walking with it in any one direction, they can't score a goal, but they also can just run out the clock and wear out the players. And it's this weird sort of filibuster. It's a hissy fit filibuster where you can just make up laws that are unconstitutional, and then we have to go back to court all over again. And it's happening over and over and over and over. This one in particular made me mad because what they used to do before is what I described. This is actually just actively saying, we don't care about this case. We're just going to wait for it to cool off and then pretend like this is a new case again. It's a huge problem. This is an enormous problem because this really could tear apart the judicial system. This really could. What you could do, and this is true for Democrats and it's true for Republicans. If you and your party get in office and you have something that you want to push, pro or anti-abortion, pro or anti-gun, whatever, you can simply litigate the issue. In the meantime that you're litigating the issue, you're in charge. Your law stays put usually. A lot of courts don't want to put a stay on the law while they're discussing it. They usually side with the government and say, well, while we're litigating the case, your case or your law can continue on for the sake of stability. That's usually the idea. For the sake of stability, we don't want this going back and forth. And, I don't want to say that this happens a lot with gun cases, by the way, where a district court will say, oh, this is terribly unconstitutional. You can't have this. But I'm going to stay my decision until it gets to the appeals court because, I know what the appeals court is going to do because they're very political and trying to get into the Supreme Court, and so they're going to do whatever the government wants them to do. So for the sake of stability, I'm going to put a stay on this decision, and then we'll see what the appeals court says. Then the appeals court says, oh, yeah, well, surprise, surprise, we're anti-gun, just like everybody thought, and we're also going to go ahead and shut this down. And then it has to get all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, hey, you did this wrong. The Bruin case says otherwise, don't you understand? Now do it again. And then this actually recently happened in California, by the way. This has nothing to do with SB 452, but this happened where they then sent it back down to the appeals case, and then the appeals court, and then the appeals court said, oh, well, we'd better redo the whole thing. Look, we're not going to hear the case correctly from our point of view on our bench. We'd better make it happen again. And so they sent it back down to the exact same judge who said the exact same thing. And I think he actually started the case. I didn't read the entire thing, but I believe he actually started with something like, here we are again. And they made him rewrite case law with the understanding that now we want you to actually deal with this via Bruin. And then when it, of course, got back to the appeals case, they ignored Bruin. Ta-da! So this is where a lot of the political violence is going to sort of have, not civil war or anything like that. I'm talking about sort of the real battle over politics is going to be in the courts, because we're not really seeing a lot of anything but gridlock in Congress. We're not seeing a lot of that anywhere else. It's really just in the court system that is our last defense against this sort of nonsense, and it's not doing that well. It's not doing that well. There needs to be, just to come back to the original point, there must be some kind of enforcement aspect that is faster than this, because we cannot just let these people, whoever they are, I don't care if they're Democrats or Republicans, you cannot have people bouncing the ball around with a stick in the air telling you that we can't grab the ball until it hits the ground. It's going to cause severe problems. Whatever side of the aisle you're on, this is bad. This is incredible. This is an incredibly bad thing to start doing. And the Democrats are doing it because they don't care. They do not give a shit. The simple fact is, a lot of Democrats don't care about this and never did. But the only reason why this hasn't been an issue thus far is because Republicans weren't following suit. So when Roe v. Wade passed, for example, what you didn't see is a lot of this stuff in state courts. States said, hey, we respect the law of the land. We don't like it, and we think that this is bull. This is bad case law, and it's just bad legal work in general. But that is how our politics works. That is how the system works, and we cannot go after the system this way. And so we're just like, that was it. That was the end of the discussion. We had a lot of grassroots stuff happening where a lot of people were trying to have discussions about abortion. But what you did not see is a lot of states sort of playing hanky-panky with the law around abortion. They allowed Planned Parenthood to come in and do their thing. And it really wasn't until Republicans finally started to think that the system was so rigged that it didn't matter that you actually did see courts. I think it was a couple of states in the South. I can't remember exactly which ones. But a couple of states in the South finally, about 2020 or so, finally said, you know, if everyone's going to just play hanky-panky with the courts, we are. And they finally, they went against Roe v. Wade that way. That's what starts to happen. If the playing field is not level, people will just start to cheat. The conservatives, the Republicans, they seem to have tried to hold off for as long as they could. And now it's gotten to a point where it seems like everyone just has to cheat their way through. That is how you are going to get a destabilization effect that is far-reaching and will end in violence. If we cannot respect the law in America, there is no America. We are a nation of laws, period. That was always the idea when Roe v. Wade was passed. The idea was we are a nation of laws, and if this is the law of the land, however rotten this was that it happened at all, we will respect the law of the land. Because to do otherwise is chaos. To do otherwise is an even greater evil. Our country will literally kill itself. It will destroy itself. We will fight each other in battle. So if you want stability, if you want this country to keep going, if you want the experiment to continue, this kind of hanky-panky with the law needs to stop. It needs to stop right now, and they're not going to.